Welcome. I'm Diana Partington,
And I'm Madeline Finn.
and this is DBT and the Dharma.
Woo woo, episode 2.
Fabulous. So, our focus in this episode, as we explore the intersection between dialectical behavioral therapy and teachings of Buddhism, is mindfulness is a practice.
Emphasis on the practice part.
So, mindfulness can be such an incredible help in this journey of reducing suffering, that being mindful awareness of what's happening, being in the present moment. Maddie, what does mindfulness mean?
Oh my gosh, that's a lot to unpack. What does mindfulness mean? It's better for me to talk about what mindfulness is not.
Okay.
So oftentimes we think of mindfulness as this like Zen, I'm gonna float on a cloud, nothing bothers me, everything's perfect.
That's such crap.
Right, it's total crap. It's total crap. So what mindfulness really is it is a practice that trains our mind to be able to come back to an anchor of our choosing. So whether that anchor is a conversation I'm having with somebody, continuing to come back to that, or
Wait. So, like, how many times has anyone done this, right? Where you're in a conversation and you're thinking, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to say? Or you're thinking about lunch. Or mostly I think people are thinking about what am I going to say next so I don't sound like an idiot.
Totally.
Right? And that is not mindful listening.
Exactly.
Mindful listening is when I'm actually paying attention to what you're saying.
So I would even say mindful listening is setting an anchor to come back, because the mind is going to inevitably wander. That's what the mind does. It's not a personal thing. Just as the ears hear all on their own, or the eyes see all on their own, the mind will think, the mind will wander. And so sometimes when we're thinking about mindfulness, we think it's this absence of wandering. I think it's more training the mind to return. Returning in itself is the practice. It's
that.
Does that make
totally
sense?
Get that right. So mindfulness is the ability to choose an anchor and then bring the mind back to that anchor. Whether it's like, I want to be in this present moment with this thing, or I guess it's always kind of, I want to be with the thing that's happening right now.
For the most part, I mean, there are some times when you want to focus on anchors to try and ground yourself so that the present thing isn't so stressful. Like, there's a story in your book. It's the Barracuda story. This is one of my favorite stories. So, long story short, there's this, what's the name of the character again?
Narissa.
So Narissa, where does she live?
In the Virgin Islands.
In the Virgin Islands. So Narissa lives in the Virgin Islands, and she's like taught her whole life that barracudas are terrifying, correct? That's
dangerous.
Like, dangerous. And like,
does everyone know what a barracuda is?
We'll put a photo of a barracuda. It's a very scary fish.
It's a scary fish with big teeth.
It's a long piranha. That's how I think about it.
That's how you think about it? Okay. It's a saltwater
piranha. We don't need to talk about piranhas, but I was going to be like, are piranhas saltwater? Are they freshwater?
They're freshwater.
See,
Amazon.
I'm learning so much. But she's taught her whole life that barracudas are dangerous and they like shiny things. And if you're in the water and they see a shiny thing, they're like, oh my gosh.
And they're going to bite you.
They're going to get you.
They're going to bite your finger off. They're going to bite your breast off.
That's terrifying.
I know. What? Well, yeah, wouldn't that make you scared? That would make me scared to get in the water.
So Narissa grows up...
Okay.
Narissa grows up afraid of barracudas. Long story short, she winds up on a boat. The boat ceases to work. The boat is
the
stuck.
Motor conks out.
Yeah, it's just gone. So Narissa has no other option but to swim back to shore to get help. Correct? Am I right? I'm telling you.
They're about 1.5 miles off the coast.
So she's a strong swimmer. She's not stressed about it. She actually did her reps and she feels good. But it's the barracudas in the water that are the terrifying thing. And she had practiced swimming so much that the cool part about the story is when she gets in the water and she starts to have these like thoughts of barracudas, it starts to scare her.
Let's just back up a second, because the thing is, since we're talking about mindfulness as a practice, the reason that she's able to do what you're about to tell is that she has spent an hour every day swimming in the pool. And as she's swimming, she's thinking, kicking, breathing, stroking. She's not thinking about lunch. She's not thinking about why her boyfriend didn't text her. She's not thinking about the exam that she's facing. She's just thinking, she's anchored
Mm-hmm.
to the experience of swimming.
Exactly.
And she has a mantra.
Oh!
Present moment, only moment.
That's beautiful.
Present moment, only moment. What does that mean?
Present moment, only moment. I mean, it's meaning that she's not focusing on what could happen or what has happened. She's just in that exact moment. And the thing that's cool about it is because she spent so much time practicing, when she gets into the water and she starts to have these thoughts of barracudas and gets scared, she's almost has
a panic attack. And what do you call a panic attack when you're in the water?
Drowning. Yes. And so she's basically on the verge of this panic attack, and so she comes back to this.
And so she's in danger of drowning.
Right? All because she's thinking about these barracudas that aren't necessarily even there in the present moment. But the reason I love this story is for that, like, kicking, stroking, like that whole, the body operation of swimming becomes the anchor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily that, like, she's not thinking about anything else except that moment. It's more so she continues as her mind wanders to the thought of the barracudas in the water, the could be barracudas in the water. She continues.
So her mind is falling into the future.
Yes.
Of things that have not happened yet, but she's afraid they're going to happen.
Exactly. And so what she does is she has trained her awareness to come back to the motion of the swimming, which is the first foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of breath and body. It's literally like textbook, the first thing you focus on when you're learning mindfulness. And that's my favorite part about that whole story is it's like, okay, the deep connection to body and that motion of it becomes her anchor.
Wait, so let me just reiterate. So we're talking about the barracuda story that's in my book, DBT for Life, Skills to Transform the Way You Live, in the chapter on mindfulness as a practice. But what you're bringing in is the first foundation of mindfulness.
Yep.
So from Buddhist psychology, what I hear you saying is the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of breath and body.
Correct. You got it.
So it's like, what's happening with my body? What am I experiencing?
It's less of a asking the questions. It's less of the like, what's happening, all the stuff. It's more just, my body is my anchor. Right? So it's not being like, okay, how do my hands feel? And how does this feel? And how does this feel? It's more like, okay, I'm going to be present with whatever arises in my body in this moment. And that's going to be my anchor. When my mind wanders, I'm going to come back to that. You need a place to come back to.
So in DBT, we call that the observe skill, where it's just observing. You're not like trying to label it. You're not trying to name anything. You're just in the experience.
Yeah. So essentially that's what it is. But really the mindfulness part is the coming back.
Okay.
It's the coming back to the anchor. It's not necessarily living in that anchor all the time because that's impossible.
Right.
The mind wanders, like I said, and her being able to see her mind wandering and go, ooh, I'm gonna come back to my body.
Right. So instead of falling in the future, that fear of, oh my gosh, are there barracudas, or like, you know, like all of us do, is what's it going to mean? What's going to happen in the future? How's that going to go? What about the past? You're anchored into the present. And so what she's able to do is not drown, not have a panic attack, because her practice is so intense.
Bingo.
So that brings me to my favorite point.
Okay.
When I talk about mindfulness as a practice, you don't learn to do mindfulness by reading about mindfulness. You don't learn to do mindfulness by talking about mindfulness. You have to practice coming back to the anchor. So the way I think of it is like when you do any kind of meditation practice, it's literally that, like, so here's I'm going to show you my big gun.
Gun show.
This is the gun show. Okay.
For those who cannot see, Diana is making a literal, like, pumping iron fist.
Yeah. I'm like showing you my guns, right? So, except for I'm wearing long sleeves. So, fist is up here. So, like, audience, listeners, raise your hand, like, make a fist and bring your fist up to your shoulder. So your elbow's bent. All right. And now we're going to do curls. So you're going to let your arm fall out, and then you're going to pull it back. And fall out, pull it back. Where's the work?
In the pulling it back.
In the pulling it back. So here's your mind, right? and you're like, okay, my anchor is my breath. Now, just to be clear, some people, when their anchor is their breath, they dissociate.
Yeah. Or it can be really tough for anybody who's experienced trauma. I don't recommend starting with the breath. There's plenty of other really solid anchors, which I'll talk about in a minute after you tell me.
I like to use my cat as my anchor. Oh. I like to pet him and just focus on him. Anyway, so here's the thing. Here I am. I'm patting my cat, Beans, who you can see on the website. I'm patting Beans, and I'm just focusing on Beans because it's mindfulness practice. And he's so cute, and his little face. And then I'm like, oh, I really got to answer that email. And my mind is falling out. So now my arm is falling down. And I'm like, oh, no. Come back. Come back to the breath. Come back to Beans. Come back to the body. Come back to whatever the anchor is, right? And then I fall out again, and I come back. And I fall out, and I come back. And that, to me, is the brain gym of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Right? That whatever that anchor is that you're anchored on, when your mind falls out, which it's going to do, right? It's monkey mind. Our mind just kind of jumps from one thing to another.
That's what it does.
Yes. So then the work is when we're bringing the mind back. And why do we care about doing that? To me, we care about doing that because when I'm at work, and I'm wondering about this terrible, painful thing that I'm going through, but I really need to get my job done. I can say, okay, brain, I'm going to anchor on my job right now, and I will take care of my feelings after work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So instead of falling to the future about what's going to happen with that personal issue, or instead of thinking my regrets about the past, I'm like, okay, like for me, I'm a therapist. All right, I'm setting that aside. That's one of the things I love about being a therapist is the mindful listening.
Oh, yeah.
Is that you just get to come into the room and your whole focus really has to be your client.
Totally.
Because otherwise you lose track of what the hell they're talking about and they know. So it's a privilege to get to practice that mindfulness, that in therapy sessions, the client is the anchor.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like reiterating, the anchor can be anything, right? So the first foundation of mindfulness comes from the Satipatthana Sutta. It will be on the website. Don't stress about knowing it.
Any Pali, Sanskrit, these Buddha languagey things that Maddie mentions, we're going to have a vocabulary list on the website that you can refer to.
I'm going to spend so much time on it. It's going to look awesome, I promise. So the Satipatthana Sutta is the Buddha's teaching on mindfulness. And there's 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this first one is breath and body. And the thing that's tough is, especially in meditation, most of the time we associate it with breathing. It has to be breath.
Right. That's the traditional thing that everyone hears about, right? Yeah. Okay, you're going to sit and you're going to like
breathe.
Look this dude, right? You're going to sit here and you're just going to focus on the breath. And again, as I mentioned, like Marsha Linehan in dialectical behavioral therapy, she does not actually teach meditation, like traditional meditation, because of the problem that so many of our clients have with dissociation.
Yes, absolutely. And I have the same thing when I teach a lot at like public libraries and corporate spaces too. It's really common, I think, for folks to not be as trauma informed as they could be as meditation facilitators. When you start to meditate on your breath, you can dissociate, you can hop back onto a trigger. It can be really tough. And so what I'll tell some of my folks that I work with is, if that starts to happen, there's other ways to anchor into the body and that are not necessarily as inward. So one of those would be opening your eyes and looking for all the green things in the room. So picking a color and just cycling through, okay, that's green, that's green, that's green, that's green, that's green. Or letters, like if you're on a plane, I know you've got like some plane anxiety, right? And so breathing might actually make you hyperventilate a little bit more. So instead, if you've got a book with you, count the A's, count the E's, and let that be your anchor. And when the mind wanders back to turbulence or anything like that, you just say, oh.
Well, that's actually where my cat is really a fantastic anchor. For real, like what I've noticed, I'll just tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So emotional support animals are real. I have this terrible fear of flying, right? And but for whatever reason, when I'm with Beans, he is my cat is my anchor. As long as I'm touching him and I keep coming back to him, I don't seem to have any anxiety on the plane. And I do feel like that's part of what this is, right? Like I'm so, and I don't know if it's a distraction, like I'm so mindful of him that there's not enough room in my brain to panic about the turbulence. I don't know what it is, but it feels like there's a mindfulness element.
Well, it is mindfulness. That's the thing. Mindfulness is the practice of having an anchor, falling away, and coming back. That's literally, that is mindfulness.
Yeah.
And it's not this like getting it perfect. It is that you're training your brain. You're basically like carving neural pathways to be able to say, okay, if this is happening, I know that I can anchor on something else. I know that if I have a bad day, so I smoke sometimes, right? Like I have cigarettes sometimes, and part of my practice with trying to quit is when I notice that I have the craving for a cigarette, instead of instantly going to the cigarette, I can say, okay, I'm gonna anchor on my dog. And I'm going to anchor on that. And then my mind will wander to a cigarette. And I'll be like, oh, I'm going to anchor on my dog. And I'll do that for 30 minutes. And then I'll go have a cigarette. Because it's not about getting it perfect. It's about carving that neural pathway to have that strength. Like you were saying, it's to gain that muscle and those reps.
It's the repetition.
Exactly.
Repetition.
And that's mindfulness. It's the practice that is the mindfulness in itself.
I feel like it's the practice of putting your mind where you want it.
Yeah.
And falling out.
Yep.
And then bringing it back.
Yeah, because most of the time I have people, who, especially in corporate spaces, who will say, I can't meditate, my mind's too busy. And most of the time what I say to them is, good. Like that's a great opportunity to practice, because if the mind does not wander, there's no opportunity to practice.
And this, of course, is the reason that mindfulness practice can be so irritating.
Exactly.
Right? So it's that thing you started out talking about, how like, oh, it's like so zen. I'm like, oh, I'm on the mountain meditating. And I want to be clear, there are moments that feel like that.
Totally.
But usually for me, when I notice that it's feeling so good, I'm like, oh, this feels so good. And that's literally my mind falling out.
Exactly.
Right? So, but yes, for me, one of the things that was so crucial on my journey is when my DBT therapist told me that meditation is irritating. And I was like, oh, like it's agitating and irritating and annoying, and you like feel so much resistance to doing it, because I think a lot of times when people are, and again, I want to be really clear, when I say meditation, I'm talking about any mindfulness practice where you are returning to the anchor. It's going to be annoying. Sometimes it's really boring.
Yeah, sometimes it's boring. Sometimes it's really emotional. Sometimes you start to see, I always say this, like, when you start to gain wisdom or insight through meditation, you start to see things, and half the time you're not going to like what you see. So I start to notice how often my mind goes to wanting the cigarette. I start to notice every time I'm wandering, it's I at least when I first started practicing would get frustrated with myself. I'd be like damn, my mind wandered again, like
right
and like, oh, it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And what I try to tell people now is when you notice the mind wandering, go, ooh, yay, like it's a little celebration.
But it's that thing. One of my favorite like meditation practices that I teach with my clients is, it's for the describe skill in DBT, where you're naming what's happening. And so it's that you're like, okay, I notice that I'm tasting something in my mouth. I notice that I'm thinking. So it's literally, you just say thinking, tasting, smelling, sight, if your eyes are open, sensing something in your body. But my absolute favorite is mind wandering. That's when you know, you're like, oh, I have gone completely somewhere else. I've left the room, and you catch it, and then you just, in the friendliest way possible, mind wandering.
In a kind and gentle way. So that's why saying to ourselves when we catch our mind wandering, yay, oh, great, I have an opportunity to come back, because it's really
because I caught it. I noticed.
It's the noticing. The noticing.
That's the mindfulness, isn't it?
Is the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So most of the time when people are like, man, my mind was so agitated during that sit, I was like, great, do you notice that? And it can be really frustrating, but with a lot of practice, you start to be able to have these longer moments of uninterrupted mindfulness, and it can be really pleasant. It can be a really lovely experience, but mindfulness is not meant to be an experience. It's meant to be a practice, in my opinion.
So, right. So now probably I can imagine if I was listening to this, I'd be like, oh Lord, yet another set of people telling me that I've got to sit down and set a timer for 20 minutes and blah, 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 this and that. And so when I'm teaching mindfulness, and I know you have a much more traditional practice, like a very structured practice, which obviously it's kind of like if you're going to go to the gym and you're going to do leg day and arm day and all that stuff, that is going to help you build strength in a way that if you're like me and I'm just like, I just want to go for a walk. Do you know what I mean? That's a different kind of strength building.
Yeah, I do tend to jock out on it a little bit. I'm a total nerd about meditation.
No, I love that. And that is, and I want to be clear, like that is an option. And for those of us who are not such meditation jocks, literally like going for a mindful walk to me is so lovely, where I'm just like, I'm going for a walk, and like right now the magnolias are in bloom, right? So I'm like checking out the magnolias, and then my mind wanders to something in the present or something in the future, something in the past, and I'm like, okay, that I'm going to just bring it back to the magnolias. I'm going to bring it back to the breeze. I'm going to bring it back. And so I just want to remind people, if they're not familiar with this idea, that you can practice mindfulness with literally anything you're doing.
Anything. I always tell folks, especially when they're getting started, to pick a very small thing, one particular thing. So brushing your teeth, letting that mindfulness of that body be the anchor. Or pick a hallway or like a stairwell or an elevator that you encounter on a daily basis and make that your mindfulness gym. So when you get on the elevator, okay, I'm going to be really present here in this elevator. I'm going to breathe in this elevator. I'm going to be here. And then when you step off, okay, you did it. Congrats, right? And the other thing I love is also anytime, if you drive, anytime you're at a red light, like taking a moment to like stop, and because breathing is a really solid form.
It's that thing you meditation people say is it's always with you.
It's always with you. It's this old friend, the breath. You hear all the things about it, but at a stoplight, saying, okay, for this stoplight, I'm going to focus on my breath. For this stairwell, I'm going to focus on my breath. And it's really those small chunks where you can start to incorporate it that helps you get momentum to get maybe a bigger practice of, okay, now I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to be really mindful with the dishes, or I'm going to be on a subway ride and I'm going to focus on my breath for the whole subway ride. And then you turn into weirdos that go to meditation retreats for like a couple days.
I love that.
But yeah, anything can be your anchor.
Okay. So we're literally like, oh yeah, practice this, practice that. So why? Why would you do that?
Why would you do
I mean, because literally, like, I'm doing the dishes, I'm thinking about I don't want to be doing the dishes. So I got music on, or I've got a podcast on because I'm escaping, and that feels better than, oh, the dishes and the greasy water.
Well, because we're pushing away the things that we don't like, and we're pulling towards us the things we do like, which we'll talk about in another episode of like this clinging and this craving. But the reason we practice mindfulness, I always say we start with small annoyances so that when larger things come up, we're able to deal with them a little bit better. And the other piece about it too is like, why practice mindfulness? Why do these things? And it goes back to what we talked about in the first episode, which is to alleviate suffering.
Yeah.
If we can learn to be with the dishes, imagine if we have a breakup. We can start to learn how to be with that. We can start to learn how to I always say, see clearly so we can respond wisely.
Well, this is literally like, if we go back to the Barracuda story, I think the Barracuda story is really an analogy for how that practicing, so that when you are about to drown in the ocean because of your fear of something that might happen, How many of you have had panic attacks about something that might happen, or just lived in incredible suffering about regrets about something that has happened? But my favorite thing about that, the future tripping, is that a lot of times the thing doesn't actually happen, right? And so you had all this agony for something that didn't happen. And in the barracuda story, there is never an actual barracuda. So she could have drowned because of her fear of barracudas, but because of her mindfulness practice, she is able to stop looking into the future and the possible barracudas that could show up, and instead come back to the water, the stroking, the kicking, the breathing. And so if you're out there in the world listening right now and you are future tripping about something that may or may not happen, and it's not, obviously we got a plan for the catastrophe, we can be prepared, but there's a point where that future tripping is just ruminating and it is causing intense suffering. And if you come back into this moment right now, all you're doing is listening to a podcast and maybe doing the dishes.
Maybe.
Right? But maybe like in this actual moment, nothing bad is happening. There may have been something bad that happened a few minutes ago. There may be something bad that's coming for you in the future. But in this moment, I mean, legitimately, if you're able to listen to a podcast right now, probably nothing bad is happening in this very moment.
We can only hope.
I hope. Absolutely. Thank you. And that's not to invalidate or discount that there may be things going on around you and they're happening in your life that are painful. But if you come into this moment right now, you can reduce your suffering.
Exactly. And we see clearly, right? The more that we train this muscle, the clearer we see. And the clearer we see, the more we're able to respond to it in a way that aligns with our values. And
we are totally going to get into more of that later.
We are. But for now, I want to leave y'all with something actionable. I want to leave y'all with something to be like, okay, some homework. I like homework. I don't know about you, but I like a little bit of like, do this, try this. So,
well, can I say?
Yes.
To me, it's not so much like, here's torture homework. It's more like, here's something that you can do right now.
Exactly.
That can help reduce your suffering literally today.
Today, in this moment. And so what we want you to do is think about, what can you anchor in today for the rest of the day? What can you anchor in for even the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes? If that's a sound, if that's a sight.
It could be music.
It could be music, absolutely. It could be a conversation with a friend. What can you practice anchoring in today?
Right, where you can just be present to the thing that's actually happening.
And then coming back and keep coming back. Just keep over and over coming back to that thing and just see what happens.
Yeah. It might just save your life, because the ending of the barracuda story is that about 500 yards from shore, 500 feet, I don't know, something like that, there's a boat. A boat shows up and she sends the boat to save her friends who are, so she had left her friends on the little boat that stopped working. And so she sends that boat back to get them. And so this is a true story, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's a true story. And when my friend told me the story, I was like, why do you just get in that boat? And she's like, because I was like in the zone. She was going to swim. She swam the last bit to shore, waits for her friends. And I was like, okay, legitimately, that's where the barracudas hang out. Is like that right off of the shoreline.
Terrifying.
Right?
Terrifying.
I was like, but she was so in the zone. And also, I just want to say that I did a little research on this. And the fear of barracudas is far stronger than the actual probability of being attacked by a barracuda. It's very rare that barracudas actually attack people unless they're being spearfished. Like someone's trying to get them.
I didn't know this was a biology podcast. I love it. I love it.
So now you know a little more about barracudas.
Go be mindful on some barracuda research.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we like to say, if you've heard the barracuda story, is no actual barracudas. Or ask you, what is your barracuda? What's the thing that your mind keeps going to that's scaring you? That there's actually a low probability of that happening. And just checking in.
Yeah.
What's my barracuda?
What can you anchor to kind of
step away from the barracuda?
Get some space.
I mean, it's literally like with my fear of flying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is statistically, it's very low probability of being harmed. Everyone's like, oh, you're much more likely to be hit by a car or have a car accident. Not to freak out anyone who has phobias about riding in cars. We're just talking probability. But when I anchor in my cat, it makes it more manageable.
And that's what we're here for, is managing and relieving suffering.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to connecting with you in episode 3.
Catch you on the flip side.